of what we kind of talking about active listening. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. But what else? The other thing I think is interesting about that is if we only hear 25 to 50% of what we listen to telling us, and then we actually respond, we start talking with them, they're only hearing 25 to 50% of what we're saying. So we can sit there and think, man, I just rocked that conversation. I gave the best advice I've ever given in my entire life, but they don't remember it either. And all this to say, we're missing both not only us as mentors or mentees, but just humans in general. We're missing a big piece of the conversation. So that's why I feel this is really important. Because one of the things that I know, especially about mentors, is listening is one of the most important skills, right? That's how we build trust, and that's how we truly better understand people, right? So today we're really going to be talking about a couple things. We're going to talk about active listening, right? As a skill that's really going to help strengthen communication. So the goal of this session is this. I want to move away from just kind of hearing words, because I think that's what happens, to truly kind of taking stock in, are we actually listening to people? So again, we're going to talk a little bit about active listening. That's going to help us build that trust. Again, it's going to help strengthen some of those relationships. But we are going to talk a little bit about what are some techniques. And some of this is pretty simple. But it's those simple things that we get accustomed to that we overlook. Simple things that I find myself struggling with all the time. So as we kind of move into the conversation, we're going to talk a little bit about 7 barriers. These are the barriers we see when it comes to active listening. We're going to talk a little bit about how can we overcome those barriers. And I want to hear from you too. I want to hear about situations you've been in and things like that. Then we're going to close it out with just simple 4 little tenets, things that we can do to just better engage with the mentees that we're working with. And I'm going to say mentees a lot, but I think the reality of this, I could give this as a general session. Because I don't think it's a mentor-mentee thing. I think this is just human connection. So that's kind of where we're going. And then we're going to distinguish the difference between active listening, which is a big piece of what we're going to be talking about, to what reflective listening is. But before we get started, I want to ask you another question. Is there a difference between hearing and listening? What do you think?
Yes.
Okay, somebody, what do you think the difference is between hearing and listening?
Comprehension.
Comprehension?
Your lips and your ears.
Your lips and ears requires understanding. It requires a genuine interest. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but I'll throw myself under the bus. There's been times in my life that I've heard a conversation in the other room, and what do? That is what I call listening, right? I want to know what's happening. It's intentional. I want to be able to understand what they're trying to say, right? This, albeit can be used in a bad way, because maybe we don't need to be privy to that information. But this is really what we want to be doing all along. Now, we don't want to sit there when we're talking to somebody just have this the whole entire time. My point is, we want to understand what our letters are saying. So I'm going to talk about a quote throughout this entire session. Stephen Covey said it. He said, "Seek first to understand, then to be understood." And it took me a minute when I first I'm like, what's going on? But when you really think about it, we're going to talk a lot more about that. We want, before we really give a response or give our advice or things like that, we have to understand context. We have to understand why. And there's a lot of complexities that go with that. So that's the mindset, I think, of an effective mentor, right? And that's the focus of today's session, is really just that active listening. And so when we talk about hearing versus listening, it's almost like in a boxing match and fighting each other, right? So the picture that you see on the screen right now, this is kind of the opposite of listening. What you see is 2 fighters, right? They're trying to understand one another, and they're trying to defeat one another. And unfortunately, this is exactly the way a lot of our conversations go, right? Instead of listening, we're just simply waiting for our turn to respond. We're just biting at the bull. It's like, oh, I want to jump in and say something. I want to say something, right? We want to defend perhaps what our position might be. But in reality, a lot of times we just want to win the argument. And that's exactly what we see here. And that, unfortunately, happens a lot. And when we start getting combative in that, and it may not be intentional. We may not be saying, you're wrong or whatever. But when we fight to dominate the conversation, this is exactly what we're trying to do. And then we're going to defeat the other person, and they're going to walk out, and they're not going to have a relationship with us. So it's a really big thing to understand. And so when we talk about active listening, hearing is only the first step. There's actually 4 stages of active listening that we kind of want to mentally process and think about. And this is something that as I was driving here, I went through it in my head. I'm like, man, okay, this is areas where I can do that. We're evaluating. This is where we consider the information. And we're considering how might we respond to this. We're still not responding. Stage 4 is when we finally respond, right? And it's really not us trying to be right. What it is us demonstrating through our words and our actions that we've heard what that individual's had to say. That's what we want to get to as mentors. That's what we want to get to as human beings. We want to get to stage 4. When we respond in a way that the individual feels heard, not only are we going to be able to build that trust and be able to help navigate complexities and things in their life, but they're going to want to continue that relationship. And so that's exactly what we're looking for. So we unlock a lot of potential when we do this, a lot of potential. Active listening does more than help us hear. Again, it helps us understand. When we listen to people, it shows that we care. We can build trust. But most importantly, this is where we fall short. Most importantly, we identify what really matters to the individual. What matters in their life. They are the experts in the room. They are the authors of their story. Regardless of our experiences, we don't know what that story is. So, for example, think of a veteran who works as a teacher and they casually mention they're worried their disability check didn't arrive, and now they don't know how they're going to make their car payment. I might have empathy and say, man, I'm really sorry to be in that situation. But if we're not listening carefully, what we may not realize is they may be experiencing a financial crisis. And why is that important for us? Sure, I'm sorry that you're not able to make your car payment, but that piece that we're missing is a critical piece. Why? That's where we go to our mentor coordinator. That's where we go to the case manager and say, hey, listen, I had a conversation with Matt. He's struggling right now because he didn't get his disability check, so he's not going to make his car payment. But to the team, or to you, to all of us who are actively listening, it unlocks something bigger because we realize there's some financial things we're going to have to look out for. There may be some resources that we have to identify so that we can help Matt get to where he needs to go. So it helps build situational awareness, right? So again, we have to seek, like Stephen Covey said, seek first to understand, not to be understood. Remember that active listening is not something that just comes natural. It's something that's a choice. It's something that we intentionally have to be able to do. Right? So imagine you have a mentee that says, I'm thinking about dropping out of treatment. Most of us, we're probably immediately going to say, no, don't do that. But when you think about Stephen Covey's quote, what he says about seek first to understand, not to be understood, what he would say is hold on. Before dropping out, before you respond, you need to understand. So what do we want to do? Tell me more about why you're thinking this way. What's going on that maybe we can help you with? Not, no, don't do it and tell them what to do right away. We want to understand the situation before we give a response. So we're going to try just a quick game. So if you got a pen and paper in front of you, I encourage you to take it out. If you can plug this away on your phone. I don't know, you all have the privilege of listening to my boss, Scott, for the last session, right? Great guy. If you know Scott, he loves games. He likes engagements. So here's what we're going to do. Before we dive into this core skill, I want you to take out that paper, and I'm going to have a list on the left side of your screen that's going to be individuals. And then what I want you to do is match it to who you think they are. So for example, we've got individuals on the left, and then we're going to pull a statement on the right. I'll go ahead and read them in case you can't in the back. So the very first statement is, this individual, so for example, real quick, if you think it's Nelson Mandela, you put 1-A. So this individual transformed counseling through empathetic, non-judgmental listening. Think about all of those folks and think who that might be. The next one. This individual was famous for making guests open up through attentive, empathetic conversation. What's that?
Nothing.
Give the answer away?
Of course.
Abraham Lincoln.
This individual, known for long conversations with ordinary people and opponents alike before forming decisions. That's pretty serious. This individual cultivated trust partly through disciplined listening during reconciliation efforts.
Mahatma Gandhi.
Jokes. This individual taught the importance of humility, attentiveness, and understanding before speaking.
One. Maybe also Mandela.
And then we got one more. This individual was famous for hearing out rivals, critics, and cabinet members.
That's Lincoln. That's definitely he put it. There you go.
Everybody good?
Republicans and Democrats on his team.
Everybody good? All right. Let's see what we got. So, here's what we got. So red matches red. So the first one is Nelson Mandela, right? Nelson Mandela cultivated trust partly through disciplined listening during reconciliation efforts. What he did is he intentionally used listening as a leadership tool. His ability to really genuinely hear people helped rebuild trust across deeply divided groups. And this is my favorite. Humility and willingness to learn begin with listening. That makes sense. Abraham Lincoln was known for patiently listening to rivals, critics, and advisors before making difficult decisions during one of the most divisive periods in American history. Can we all agree with that? Well, when I read that, I'm like, that mirrors literally everything that I saw in the textbooks about Lincoln. Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey became one of the world's most influential interviewers because she made people feel genuinely heard and understood. Anybody an Oprah fan?
Hard.
This one, my wife and I had a conversation on the way down. This is one we really think was pretty awesome. Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers transformed counseling by shifting the therapist's role from an expert who gives answers to an empathetic listener who helps people discover their own answers. That's good stuff. That's huge. And then Mahatma Gandhi. Did I say it right? He believed effective leadership began with understanding people, which required listening before acting. So what do they all have in common? Listening. They all use listening as a tool for influence. Right? Their strategy was, I need to listen. I'm going to use that for influence. And what did that do? They did that to build trust. They did that to help build leadership. Not simply as a communication skill. They understood people so they could better make decisions rather than be reactive. That's something that we have a pretty big culture of right now, right? Being reactive. We want to react to every single situation. We want to fix everything. But they had a lot of other things in common as well. They were respectful, right? They showed concern. They were open-minded. How many of you have had conversations with somebody that's so close-minded you just want to get out of there? Yep. That happens a lot in our society, doesn't it? Yep. Too many times. Oh yeah. This one for me personally is my favorite, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. But attention and being present. Presence. Being reflective. Reflecting what they hear. Nothing makes me realize you heard what I have to say when you do that. Exercising emotional control, not reacting with anger, frustration, but compassion, just listening. And humility. Humility is a big deal. Here's why I think it's a big deal. There's this thing called cultural humility. Right? We all have biases. We all think we know our way. of doing things. I hear it all the time. Well, I serve, and so did they, so they should do it this way. But I'm here to challenge that, because you may have served, but their service is vastly different than yours. Would we agree? Sure, similar experiences, things like that. Went through the gas chamber, had snot dripping down your ankles, right? Heard the, all that stuff. But that doesn't mean it's the same. And I think that's a big thing. So what do I mean by that? When I talk about humility, what that means to me is this. They're the experts in their own story. Practicing humility is listening and being able to understand the chapter of what that story is. In order to, but I'll bet you, and I'm going to be real with you. Talk to me, raise your hand sometimes when we hit one that maybe you struggle with, because I'm going to be transparent with you. But these are just 7 barriers that really are critical that we have when it comes to effective listening. So again, we're going to take the time to kind of address each one of these. And just think about it in your life and how you engage with other individuals. So the first one is not being present. What's that mean to someone?
Distracted.
Distracted? What else?
On their phone.
On your phone. Yep.
Not focused.
Not focused? For me, it's about the seat that doesn't care. That's what I think about. I may be here, but I'm not really here, right? Have you ever known someone, or do you have something in your life who you don't really listens to you when you're talking to them? How does that make you feel? True, that's make you feel. Unimportant? Ticked off? When we're distracted or disengaged, what it does is people feel unheard. They don't feel important. They don't feel like what I have to say matters. And I don't know about you. That's the quickest way for me to completely shut down. I'm out. If you're not even giving me the time of day, why am I even here? Especially in the veterans treatment court world. We go through this whole court system, right? And we ask mentors who are, it's so incredible, volunteer their time. But the thing that's challenging is when you volunteer your time, you're not only volunteering your time with the BTC, you're volunteering your time every single time you're engaging with something. And so it's important just to have that awareness again of like, if I'm going to do this, I got to commit through it, not the part of it. I got to show up, right? So it's important to remember too that we've got to hear our mentees, right? Because what's important to them is important to us. They deserve our full attention when we're making time to meet with them. Think about how busy they are. Drug testing, court, treatment, support groups, check-ins, you know it. Plus they got a family and all the responsibilities that a lot of us have. And then they're coming and they're taking time to meet with us. I think it's a real big privilege that they do that, right? So I think it goes both ways. So I think when we show up, that's important. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. The other one is direct easy fix to a problem and then telling them what to do. And I think this comes natural, right? Especially those who serve in leadership roles. In the military, a lot of folks that are trained, it's essential to do that because in some situations, failing to solve a problem could be a life or death consequence, right? I think that that's a big piece, is we're all problem solvers, and we want to be able to solve the problem. But that's not our role. It's not really our role, not outside of just being a mentor. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask, that's the one I have problems with personally, and just for those in the room that are officers or NCOs, I mean, you got to remember that's what you were paid to do, right? You're there to make a decision, move on to the next problem, you know. And that was very hard when I retired about 2 years ago. That was very hard to where you're not in that role anymore, where you got to provide decisions, get everything moving, get everything.
Thanks for sharing. Absolutely. Anybody else struggle with that? I work in treatment court. Some people call them problem-solving courts. This is a tough one. You know, as a former probation officer, I always have the answer. Don't do that. Stop it. Well, that was wrong. I've learned a lot in the years that I've been here. Our role, especially as mentors, and thank you for that, it's a big pivotal shift, right? Our role is to listen, is to provide support, and the big one is the guide, right? That is huge. Not necessarily to solve the problems for them, right? When we resist the urge to fix the problem, We help veterans develop their own confidence, their own judgment, and one of the big key points of treatment court, problem-solving skills. Because at the end of the day, the short window, I hope that when they graduate, you have an extended relationship with them. A lot of you still connect with veterans post-treatment court. That's awesome.
Yes.
We have to keep connected a lot better with 6 months after they graduate the program.
Awesome. Do you feel like it's naturally, or is it just something you're required to do?
That's one of the requirements.
One of the requirements? Okay.
I can't help me, we got 3 graduates in here right now, Jennifer Carzell and myself, so we've been connected ever since, and she graduated 2019, 2020, 2021, so yeah.
Where are the graduates?
Indianapolis Veterans Treatment Court, oh, Jennifer's right here,
Yeah.
Carzell's right here.
Awesome. That's good.
We've got probably one of our best graduates who's a director at a university now over years and has brought us back. Now, I listen to them, and I've been doing it for 12, 13 years. So he's here right now. He's a graduate of the program, a director at the university, got multiple degrees, and he's brought mentees. So, you know, the story just grows, never would have imagined. So he's our hero. He used to call us that.
That's
So
awesome.
he's my hero.
You got one?
Yeah, on barrier two, I found reflecting early in my leadership, being a Marine, you're always, it was this way or the highway, and so when a problem would arise, I would just say, do it this way, damn it, and you would, the counseling method there was, it wasn't consultative, as the Marine Corps called it, it was more of a directive, without even hearing about Marines' issues, whatever they had. So, yeah, I think that's the big one, and then now that I've developed or relearned empathy, now I'm able to do the listening part, because in the past, that was foreign to me.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for bringing up empathy. We're gonna talk about that. No, that's huge. Like, right? We're not there to just fix the problem. If we teach the problem-solving skills, they're gonna be able to continue that beyond just our engagement with them. And that's such a critical thing for what we're trying to do. The other one is being judgmental. Here's the thing. What do you see? What are those pictures on the right?
Soccer ball, like a soccer ball.
Soccer ball and a dog.
I got this.
That's a dog. It's a dog. Okay.
I mean, they're serial killers.
This is gonna hurt.
You ask a bunch of veterans this, you might not get answers.
Here's the thing. The reality of it is none of these images are complete, right? Our brain automatically fills in the missing pieces. And our brains do the same thing with people, right? We naturally fill in gaps based on our own experiences, and that's where false assumptions come into play, right? So, why is that important? Because we may have had similar, let's get an ice The court was going to put her in jail because she wasn't showing up to groups. And it wasn't, thankfully, we have this thing called service adjustments. And so the judge said, hey, I don't feel comfortable doing that. Let's do a reassessment. And what did they find out? She was a victim of military sexual trauma. So it explained why she wasn't going to the predominantly male group, right? So they had to go a completely different route to tailor the services to her needs. On the surface, it seemed like everything should work. But again, the danger is that false assumptions, they really narrow our thinking, right? They limit our options and they lead to poor decisions, and ultimately that's what breaks down the communication. So it's important not to just assume. That's why we have to understand context. That's why we have to understand our whole story. This is another one. Interrupting, interjecting. Anybody have somebody to do that, does that? Yeah? Me. You do that? Good. Same. I was on a Zoom with my colleague prepping for conference, and I keep him near work. I kept interrupting. And I remembered this, and I'm like, I gotta stop that. Right? And it wasn't because I was trying to be rude, it's just I thought I had something a little bit more important to say. But yeah, I throw myself over the dust. One of the quickest ways to shut down a conversation is to interrupt somebody, right? Yep. Okay? When we interject before somebody finishes, it sends the message that what we have to say is more important than what we're saying. Now, I'm going to be honest. I'm guilty, but it pisses me off too sometimes. Right? So interrupting, it disrupts the conversation. What else does it do? It rushes the speaker. If I know that you're going to interrupt me, I'm going to get what I can out as quickly as possible, which means I'm going to eliminate a bunch of stuff. And that's going to leave me feeling frustrated, disrespected. And so there's something to this slide that I like to say, and I have it down here in my notes. It says, as mentors, give the veteran time to finish their thoughts, because often the most important part of their story comes after the pause. I mean, here's what that means to me. When I go to church sometimes, and it's a sermon, sometimes I don't exactly probably pay as close of attention as I should. And sometimes my wife will say, what do you think of that? I'm like, oh, I think he said something like this, right? I'm a little nervous, right? Here's the thing. Reality of it is, that might happen, but I don't know if you, in my experience, a lot of times the last 2 minutes of that sermon, somebody comes out and starts playing the piano. And it seems like the last 2 minutes, I'm like, boom, I understand. And so a lot of times when I leave that, my wife says, what do you think? I can almost quote the last 2 minutes. If I cut that preacher off, I would miss the entire message, right? So I say that because I feel like that's what happens when we interrupt. Sometimes the most important things that they're going to say is the last thing they say. So we got to hang on to the very end and let them finish. Because we may miss a lot of information. Make sense?
See.
Barrier number 5. This is where we anticipate another person's words and thoughts. There's the old saying, and I don't know if it's good or bad, I'll let you judge. We're so close, we finish each other's words. We're just like so close. That's dangerous. Assuming you already know what the other person is going to say, right? That goes beyond interrupting. That's where we start assuming again. The reality is we can't read minds until somebody finishes speaking. We don't know their story. So when we anticipate someone's words, we stop listening, right? We start preparing our response. That's what typically happens. So as mentors, the big piece is just to slow down. That's what I find myself having to do. Chill, soak this in. We're going to get somewhere, right? And I think that active listening requires another thing, and it's not on the slide. It's this third word called patience.
We don't know that.
I can't get it. I struggle with that. But that's the truth. But I don't know about you, I got some long-winded friends. If I ask a simple question, I might get the answer 30 minutes. So it does, it requires patience. Sometimes the last sentence is the most important one. That's what I want to take away from this specific slide, okay? Barrier number 6. This is something we see a lot of. Have you ever had a conversation with someone who insisted their way was the only way? Especially in recovery? What do you mean by that?
Everybody thinks that, well, not everybody, I'm not saying everybody in this room, but I've seen a lot of people that say AA is the only way if you want to quit drinking, right? Or NA for drugs, right? We know that there's multiple pathways to recovery.
Yeah.
People seem to think that there's only one in there.
Not listening, and we assume our perspective is the only correct one. And I appreciate your example, and I'm going to hang on that for a minute. Because we're all completely different. People find recovery in different ways. And here's the other thing. Just because they served in the military doesn't mean they're going to buy into everything we have to say. Because I have a lot of veterans that don't even want to associate with that. And that's okay. We have to meet them where they're at, right? Is that fair to say? The picture is a great reminder. From one side, it's 9, from the other, it's 6. Both people are describing what they see based on their perspective. So it's important to understand each other. Our job as mentors, or just as human beings, it's not to prove that we're right. It's to understand why. Understand why. Why does the veteran see that situation the way they do? We're going to be able to relate to them a lot better if we know their why. Talk to me a little bit about that. Help me understand why that's frustrating you. Rather than saying, I don't understand why that frustrates you, that's the way to do it. That's the way to do it. Sometimes both perspectives are going to contain the truth, right? So active listening is what really helps us understand the entire picture. The great thing is, a lot of this can be fixed, right? This is why we practice. Some of the things we have to ask ourselves is this: do you have all the information? Or just maybe, is it possible that I could be wrong? Oh boy. Whoa, heat up in here.
Your wife watched your last speech.
She heard the thing.
Is she in here?
No, she's not. She wasn't invited.
We will let her know.
The other thing that I think is important, and again, pay attention to how often your conversation revolves around I. Right? Seriously. Instead of the other person, great listeners are more interested in understanding than being understood. Again, guilty. Last night I went to dinner. All I did was talk about how the day went for me. I think I didn't ask enough questions about how was it for you. And I thought about the presentation I was going to give today, right? Gotta practice it. Think about that. Are you using I? When you're meeting with your mentee, are you making it more about you than them? Something to think about. Something that's very easy to change. Self-awareness, something to realize, right? Great mentors remain humble, they remain curious, they remain willing, and they're willing to change perspective when new information is presented. We can learn a lot. The best teachers I've had in my life weren't from textbooks or weren't from college professors. I've been in treatment court since 2010. I've learned almost everything from the people that went through the program. That's how I began to understand recovery. And that's how I got into this. Because, hey, I think that change is possible. And it's because they're the experts in their lives and they can teach us how. What's that?
That's where you learn what works.
What? He said that's where you learn what works. It's where you learn different ideas too. I never thought of that. I'll tell you right now, in the community I live in, part of the Veterans Treatment Court is I live in Bentonville, Arkansas. Anybody from Arkansas?
Yeah. My brother lives there right now.
Who does?
My brother lives there.
Awesome. Bentonville is kind of the mountain biking capital of the world, at least we like to call it that. But there are mountain biking recovery groups. Some people have one person to do that, right? That's how we learn. We got that idea because of people that go through the program. Here's the other one. The final barrier is being in a hurry. People can tell when you're watching the clock. I will tell you, I have a brand new neighbor.